channel. Today we're going to make saddle pads, real felted saddle pads. And we're trying to mimic the 100% wool pads that we use on real horses. These things are like Doritos. You cannot make just one. And I kind of think I got carried away over here. You can also make other items. I've made this for my barn. You can use it as a carpet or you can use it as a wall hanging. And I bet you can't guess what I'm making here. This is going to be a mat that I could use at a live show. If you want to see that, you can see it on my Instagram channel. I'll put that down below. You can purchase the patterns if you'd like at my Etsy store, and I also do custom patterns for people if you'd like. You can contact me at Etsy or put a comment. And I'd really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Thanks so much. Let's get going. For this project, you need yarn. And for this, it has to be 100% wool, and it cannot be superwash. You cannot felt wool that has superwash because they've taken away the little things that allow it to bind together. So I've put a link below to a supplier that is very quick and most reasonable that I have found. So I would highly recommend sticking with the Patons Classic Wool Worsted. It will do the job. I mean, each color may shrink differently during felting, but that's okay. They have a wide range of colors to choose from, and it is the right stuff. Most yarn will not work for this project. It must be 100% pure wool. You'll need a set of knitting needles that are 6.0 millimeters or US 10. These ones are wood. You can use wood, metal, or plastic. It doesn't matter. But you'll need a set of 6.0 millimeter knitting needles. So to start, leave a tail at least 2 feet long. Put a slip knot in the yarn and put your needle through it. Now you can see the piece of yarn that's not attached to the main ball is towards me. I flip that, I thumb under that, my finger under the other, and then I take the needle under and over. And that casts on a stitch, under and over. And I'm gonna put a link here so that if you can't see me do it well, I'll get better instructions. And you're gonna cast on until there is 26 stitches. Now I have 26 stitches on my needle. I'm gonna do the first row knit. So again, I'm leaving links on how to do this properly because I'm not a fabulous knitter. But to knit, you put your needle in, you take the yarn from the ball around and scoop that through. Again, with this, it doesn't have to be super tight, but not loose either. So around and scoop through. Put your needle in, around, and scoop through. So all the right side rows are done like this. It's a very, very simple knitting 101 here. So all right side rows are knit and all wrong side rows are purl. So to the end. I like using these wooden needles since everything glides very easily on them. Oh, it doesn't matter what type you use. So once you get to the end, you turn your work, and so all the wrong side rows you're going to purl. So to purl, instead of going from the front to the back, you're going to go from the back to the front. And the same concept, you put the yarn around from the back to the front and scoop through. Again, from the back to the front, the yarn around from the back to the front and scoop through. And that's what you do for the full wrong side rows. And you can repeat that if you're using the same color for 28 rows, and that's your full pattern. And in the next row, we're going to talk about adding in some color. So let's say I want to add a thicker stripe. I'm going to leave this pink behind, and I'm going to pick up some blue. So I'm just going to loop over the blue, leaving this piece, the extra tail, and I'm going to start knitting with that blue. Now for 1 or 2 stitches, I'm going to take this little bit of extra blue and just wrap it behind the other blue. So if you see at the back, that blue is just going to sit there. That is all you need to do. And then you just knit all the way to the end with the blue, where the pink is still staying where it was. And because I'm using larger needles for this wool, it's so easy to use, so easy to use. You don't have to be that accurate. If you've never knit before, this is a very easy way to learn, to see if it's actually something you would like to do in the future. So once you get to the end, again, you're going to turn it around and you're going to purl back. So blue is on one side and the pink is on the other. I also don't hold my second needle, which is pretty unusual. I just let it sit in my lap. I find it easier that way. I balance it on my lap and have full use of my hands that way. I think that's very normal, but hey. So once you get to the end, you can just leave, if you're finished with the blue, you can just cut it off, or you can leave it for another row. And that's how you do a thicker stripe. So now when I turn it, I have the stripe. So when I start again, I leave the blue behind, pick up the pink, and start knitting. Now let's say I wanted to do a thinner row. So it would just be one stripe. That could be a problem now because my blue is sitting over there. If I was doing a fancy pattern, I would carry the yarn behind. But if I do that, it changes the way the piece will felt at the end. So if you're doing simple stripes, one color pieces, well, it doesn't matter, one color pieces, don't carry the yarn behind. So let's say I get to this end here, but I want to do a blue stripe now. What I would do is very simple. I go to my purl side, I take out my trusty scissors, I cut off the blue from one side, and I'd start, I leave the pink behind, and I just start with the blue now. The extra little pieces on the side are fine. If you're knitting a sweater, don't do this. It's going to make it a mess. But for what we're doing, it's fine. You'll find out once we've got that far. So see, I've just done 3 and I've got this extra piece. I'm going to wrap that over so that when I purl, it gets caught in that stitch. And that's all you have to do, catch it in one stitch. So you just pick up a color and go as you want. You can use as many colors as you want. Just leave them at the end and we'll deal with them once we do the felting and finishing. So right now I'm purling back with blue. And you can switch as many times or as many colors, whatever pattern you want. Now I've provided other patterns where they're much more complicated, and that requires carrying the yarn all the way across. But that's a different story. Again, it's not much harder, but it requires some extra work, and the yarns will tend to get a little more tangled. So you can knit back and forth, cutting the yarn, carrying the yarn as you want. and build your stripes. All you need to do is make it a total of 28 rows. And that's, each row is either a knit or a purl. So you do 14 rows of knit and 14 rows of purl. And then we'll come back and cast it off.
Yeah.
Now that I've knit 28 rows, I'm now going to cast this off. So to cast off, you just go in and do a knit stitch. And then another knit stitch. And what you do is take the first knit stitch and take it over the second knit stitch and let it drop off. Again, another knit stitch. Take the first knit stitch over the second knit stitch and let it drop off. So there should be one stitch left on your right needle. You just continue to do this all the way along. Now you can make quite a few mistakes while you do this saddle pad, because when you felt, there's quite a bit of leeway. Same with the back of the piece. It does not really matter what the back looks like at all. It will all get felted together. So as I cast off, I knit one, pass one over. Again, knit one and pass one over. Your cast off should be not loose and not tight. Again, your knitting may be very different than mine in the way of how tight or loose it is, but you'll find when you finish it, when you do the felting, it'll pretty much end up the same in the end. Now this piece took me approximately half an hour to knit. Now if it's a fancier pattern, it can take me up to an hour to knit something this big. Still, these are like Doritos. You can just keep making more and more and more. They're lots of fun. They take so little yarn, and you can finish them in an hour or two by the time, including the felting and everything. So when I get to the end here, I'm left with one stitch on the needle. Pull that through. With scissors, I'm going to cut the yarn, pass it through the loop, give it a pull, and I'm done. So the front and back, and all the extra pieces at the back, you can just cut off. As long as they're somehow secured, you're fine. It'll all get felted in by the end, and you won't have to worry about this pulling apart at all. When I was done, my piece measured approximately 5.5 inches by 6 inches across. Now, this can go straight ready for felting. Or if you'd like to add a fringe, what you can do is take a crochet hook, and along the top, you can see the different stitches. So each stitch, if you go through and grab the top 2 stitches and take a piece of yarn, pull it through, and then tie it just in 2 knots there and cut it off. I leave an inch or 2. And then I do that with each one of these stitches across the top. And I'll get back once I finish doing them all and show you what it looks like. You can see I've attached the fringe, and it's pretty rough, but that's okay. We'll fix it. It's not going to be trimmed until middle of actually felting it. The back, let's see the back pieces. It's a little rough around here, not like you do a sweater, but that's perfectly fine. Now we're going to go felt this. So begin felting. Put really hot water, and I let that run for a bit, into your kitchen sink, and throw in some detergent. Simple as that. You can use boiling water from a kettle as well, but you have to watch out for your fingers. So I'm just going to get about 3 inches of water in that. Then I'm going to get a potato masher. Yep, a potato masher. And that is all I'm going to use for this. So I'm going to take my piece and throw it in the sink. And I'm going to start rubbing it. I'm going to rub it back and forth, and I'm rubbing it quite hard. And I'm going to start rubbing on the good side. This whole process will take approximately 20 minutes. And I'm going to rub it both ways, forward, backward, make sure all the corners are done. And just rub, 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 rub. And once you've done maybe 4 or 5 minutes on the one side, flip it over. Just go back and forth. And you're going to notice the look of the stitches are changing during this time. Now I'm going to work on this for a few minutes and come back. This has been going for about 3 or 4 minutes. You can see that the stitches are still very much there of the knitting. The fringe is starting to fray a little, and at this point you can trim the fringe down. And I'm going to take mine down to about 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to put it back in the water and start rubbing some more. Trim the fringe, and when you're rubbing, make sure the fringe doesn't get stuck in anything. And again, back in there, and you will know when it starts to felt properly. It takes quite a while before you actually start noticing it, and it becomes very obvious. The stitches will all disappear, and it just becomes more of a single unit. I have been rubbing that now for about 10 minutes, and you can see how the stitching is starting to disappear. It's coming into more of a felt look, but the edges are still rough. So you've got to make sure you get all the edges done. That's very important, since that's how we're going to be shaping it. So I'm going to go back to scrubbing some more. Once you've finished felting, give it a good rinse to get rid of the soap. Just double check to make sure you can't see the knitting stitches anymore. It should have a completely different texture than what it was before. It should actually feel like a horse blanket now. So next, I would grab a tea towel, wrap it in the tea towel, and give it a little squeeze to keep the rest of the water out. Now we're going to go dry it. To dry it, fold it in half lengthwise, like it would sit on a horse, and then pull up where the withers would be, just to help give it that bit of a shape. And then stick it on a model and pull it down into shape. At this point, you can move it any way you want. Make sure you have the middle in there. If there's a pattern, it's very important to match the middle down there. Make it even, and then just leave it until it's dry, which probably takes overnight. In this next step, I've switched to a different pad. What we're going to do now is cut this. So what you're going to need to do this is a saddle, because you don't want to do this unless without some sort of saddle to make sure it fits right. So you place the saddle exactly where you want it. And in my case, I think I want it about there. And I'm going to cut along the back and along the front, along here. Then I'm going to look at the side and decide what I want to do with that. Now, I would recommend going online and looking at show horses for whatever you're making this pattern for. In my case, what I would like is to have a number right about there. So I need about this much space to give me the number and allow for it to look nice. So that's about 1/2 inch below the saddle on each side, just maybe a smidgen over 1/2 inch on both sides. And that seems to be the look that the Western pleasure riders are going with. So whatever you choose to do, whether it's an English saddle or a Western saddle or whatever, use your saddle and use that as a template for cutting, or at least get an idea of how much space you need to make it look nice. And try it on the horse, cut it a little more. It's better to start a little bigger and then cut it down as you go. But just because this was knitting doesn't mean you can't just take the scissors directly to the piece. And I'm using the pattern to gauge it. So once I've cut a piece, I put it on my saddle, see how I like it, and then I'm going to do the front. Once you've cut an edge, you can just hold it, squeeze it, and then rub it with your fingers so that it blends in with the rest of the look. There, it'll look just as good as the rest of the felted. Now that I've finished cutting, it measures approximately 3.5 inches square for my specific saddle. So I think I'm happy with that, but there's possible if you want to round corners, if you feel you haven't felted enough, you can throw that into some hot water and felt it a little bit more if you want to finish the edges, but mine are fine. And if it's a little furry, you can take a regular razor blade that you'd use on your legs or whatever, and you can actually shave if it's too fuzzy, and that works really well. But at this point, I'm happy with the cut, so I'm going to move on to the next step. For wear leathers, I cut myself 2 pieces of leather, just scrap leather, 1 3/4 inches long by 1/2 inch wide. And I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to round these edges. Now you can look online, there's all forms of different wear leathers. So I'm going to do that to both of them. And I've marked on the saddle pad pretty much where I want that wear leather to go. I want it to make sure it's under my stirrup. The whole point of this is to make sure when the rider rubs back and forth, the stirrup doesn't ruin the pad. So I'm going to create two like that. And I'm going to take my pounce wheel and create stitches, a stitch marking all around the edge of that. Once I've done that, I may do a little tooling inside of that. Again, you don't need to use wear leather. You can use black fabric or brown fabric, all sorts of things you can use for that. A piece of felt. So here's one of my wear leathers with just stitches, and there's another that is being tooled. And you can follow my tooling videos if you want to see how to do that. Now, wear leathers can also be made out of microfiber or the craft foam as well. You can do black, natural color, or something to match your saddle pad. Once you finish decorating your wear leathers, just cover them with glue at the back and glue them neatly into place and let fully dry. I'm using these pins as reference. The first one on. Make sure your wear leather is lined up with the bottom, and then you can put a weight on there to dry it. I cut another piece from scrap leather, 3/8 inch wide by 1 inch long, and rounded the edges again and put some stitches on that with a pounce wheel. And I'm going to glue that to the center front. I'm using a book to hold this down for a few minutes while it dries. For making the numbers, I used some glossy photo paper and printed out the numbers. These are on the actual pattern that I have available. Then I'm going to pick two identical and I'm going to cut those out. Once I've cut those out, I'm going to take Velcro. I've got this thin, clear Velcro that has a tape, and I'm using the hook side, not the fuzzy side. I'm going to stick those to the back of the numbers, and they will stick to the felt. If you're working off a pattern, center the pattern and pin it down, and then cut around the edges. Bareback pad I've cut out from the main pattern, a piece for the bareback pad, and from the same, a strip to go underneath the belly. Once I've cut it, I'm just going to rough the edges up just a little bit to make it blend in with the rest of the felting. Doesn't take much to get there. And then once you've got that, you can just take scissors and cut off any of the fluff that's coming out. You don't have to worry about this falling apart on you. Just give it a little trim, and if you want to shave off some of the fuzz with the scissors, if it's too fluffy. If you want to make a bareback pad, you're going to need a piece of leather lace, 3/16 or 1/4 inch, long enough to wrap around the horse's belly, plus a little. Line up the leather so it's going to go around in the correct place for the girth. Leave enough of a tab on the left side. It's going to go into the buckle, and then glue that down onto the pad, all the way from here, all the way to the other side. To make the gluing easier, I've marked both sides of where it's going to sit on the pad, so I can apply the glue now in between those two marks along here. Some cording I have from Michael's. I've threaded on a tapestry needle, and I'm going to cut that. And with the piece, I'm going to go up through one side, about there, and down at the same amount as on the other side. And that's going to create the handle that you often find on these pads. And from the underside, I'm going to snip that and glue those down. If you want to tie a knot in that, that's okay, but I'm just going to glue that down. The same rapid fuse glue that I was using on some of the other tack. I just find that that's easy to use for something like that. Line up the girth protection piece so it's about the same on both sides, maybe a little more, and then glue this piece to the leather as well. Gluing this piece on, make sure you glue it with a curve and center it as best as possible. You want this to be horse belly shaped. And let that dry. Then the piece where the buckle is going to be, a little bit with some sandpaper. I'm using a buckle I got from Rio Rondo. Just make sure it's big enough to fit your leather. Cut off the edge, make sure it's smooth. Thread the buckle onto the leather. And glue that down. And clamp that and let that dry. Buckle that onto the model. And trim this off wherever required for your adjustments.